My name is Ezra Stoltzfus, and for most of my life, I believed I was on the right path. I was raised in a strict old order Amish community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. From the time I was a child, I was taught that obedience was the key to salvation, that by following the ordinum, by living simply, by separating from the modern world, I would please God. For 42 years, I held tightly to that belief. I followed every rule. I dressed plainly. I never questioned the ways of our fathers. I married a good Amish woman, Rebecca, and together we raised 5 children under the same traditions I had known since birth. I worked hard on our farm and furniture business, believing that our prosperity was proof of God's blessing. But there was something I never spoke of, something that gnawed at the back of my mind for years. I did everything right, yet why did my faith feel more like a burden than a relationship? I had never felt the joy and peace that the preachers spoke of. I feared God, yes, but did I truly know Him? I pushed those thoughts away, convincing myself that faith was about duty, not feeling. That was until October 15th, the day my world shattered, and I came face to face with the truth I have been avoiding my entire life. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sky stretches out in endless blue, and the air is cool but not yet bitter. I had just finished my morning chores, feeding the horses, checking on the fields, when I decided to do something I rarely did. I went for a short jog down the country road, a small compromise I had made with modern health advice. Everything felt normal. My body was strong, my heart steady. The air smelled of harvested cornfields and the faint smoke of a neighbor's wood-burning stove. I was at peace, thinking of the day ahead, of my children running through the fields, of Rebecca baking fresh bread in our home. Then it happened, without warning. A searing pain exploded in my chest. It was like a vice gripping my ribs, squeezing tighter and tighter, stealing the breath from my lungs. My legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed onto the dirt road, gasping, clutching my chest, but the pain only grew worse. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. My vision blurred. The sky above me darkened, even though the sun was still shining. The last thing I remember was a woman's voice, a passing English woman, Martha Zimmerman, who had stopped her car, rushing toward me, screaming for help. Then everything went black. I awoke, but I was not in my body. I was above the scene, watching everything unfold as if I were an outsider looking in. I saw Martha kneeling beside my lifeless body, frantically calling for help. I saw the paramedics rushing toward me, their faces tense with urgency. I watched them shock my chest with paddles, trying to bring me back, and yet I felt nothing. No pain, no breath, no heartbeat. Then, suddenly, the light around me vanished. I was plunged into a darkness so deep, so thick, so absolute that it was unlike anything I had ever known. This was not the darkness of night. It was alive. It was suffocating. It was eternal. Panic surged through me. I tried to move, but I had no body. I tried to speak, but no sound came. I was trapped in nothingness, a void that stretched on forever. Then, something even worse happened. Visions of my life began flashing before me. not as memories, but as judgments. I saw myself standing in church, priding myself on my strict obedience, looking down on those who weren't as faithful as me. I saw the silent moments of my heart, the thoughts I had never spoken, the pride, the judgment, the self-righteousness. I watched as I raised my children, teaching them to follow every Amish rule, but never teaching them about God's grace. I had given them laws, but had I ever truly shown them love? I saw people in my community struggling under the weight of our traditions, believing they could never be good enough for God. I saw young men and women feeling trapped, believing that faith was a burden rather than a joy. Then I saw the most terrifying truth of all. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my way into heaven, but I had never truly known Jesus. A cry of pure desperation rose within me, but there was no one to hear it. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I understood what separation from God truly meant. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a tiny speck of light appeared in the distance. It was small at first, barely more than a flicker, but then it expanded, growing brighter and brighter until it consumed the darkness around me. Then, out of the light, he stepped forward, Jesus. His presence radiated a love so overwhelming, so pure, that I fell to my knees, though I had no physical form. His eyes, they held eternity itself. They saw everything I was, everything I had done, and yet they did not condemn me. Instead, they loved me. Then he spoke, Ezra, just my name. And yet, in that single word, I felt everything: understanding, correction, grace, forgiveness. I wept like I had never wept before. My child, you have sought me through rules and traditions, but you have not known me. The words pierced me like a sword. I had followed every Amish law, every custom, every commandment, and yet in that moment, I realized I had missed the very heart of the gospel. Your people have created many paths, thinking they lead to me, but they have often become barriers instead of bridges. Tears streamed down my face as my heart shattered. I had spent my life believing in obedience, but I had never understood grace. I had followed the rules, but I had never truly known the Savior. Jesus continued, his voice filled with both love and sorrow. Salvation is not something you can earn, Ezra. It is a gift that can only be received through faith. Everything I had believed came crashing down in that instant. I had thought my good works would save me, but Jesus had already done the work. His sacrifice had been enough all along. Jesus' words pierced through every belief I had ever held. For 42 years, I had believed that obedience was the key to salvation. I thought that by following the ordinum, by living simply, by separating myself from the world, I would somehow earn my place in heaven. But now, standing in the presence of Christ, I realized how blind I had been. I had followed the rules, yes, but I had never truly followed him. Tears streamed down my face as I looked up at Jesus. His face shone with a light so pure, so full of love and sorrow, that it broke me completely. Lord, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought I was doing what was right. I thought I was serving you. Jesus knelt beside me, his gaze never wavering. There was no anger in his eyes, only a sorrow that ran deeper than words could express. "Ezra," he said gently, "you have lived your life in pursuit of righteousness, but you have missed the most important thing, me. You have tried to reach heaven through works, but salvation was never meant to be earned. It is a gift, freely given to all who will receive it." A sob escaped my lips. I had spent my entire life trying to be worthy, trying to be good enough, and now Jesus himself was telling me that my efforts had never been enough, not because they were unworthy, but because they were never meant to be the way to God in the first place. "Lord, have mercy on me," I cried. "I see now. I see how blind I have been. I see how much I need you." Jesus smiled, and in that moment, his love surrounded me like a flood. It was not just a feeling. It was a knowing that I was forgiven, that I was seen, that I was loved not because of what I had done, but because of who he was. As I wept, Jesus reached out his hand, and suddenly the vision changed. In an instant, we were no longer standing in that radiant place. Instead, we were back in Lancaster County, but it was different. I was watching my community, but I wasn't just seeing them. I was seeing them as Jesus did. I saw young children burdened by rules they did not yet understand, believing that their worth came from how well they obeyed rather than from the love of God. I saw teenagers struggling in silence, torn between their faith and the desire for freedom, afraid that even questioning the ordinung would lead them to condemnation. I saw men and women living in quiet exhaustion, constantly striving to be good enough, fearing that the smallest mistake would displease God. And then I saw myself. I saw the way I had judged others, the way I had silently looked down on those who did not follow the Amish way. I saw the moments I had dismissed the English, believing they were lost simply because they lived differently. I saw how I had placed traditions above grace, obedience above relationship, and works above faith. Tears filled my eyes. "Lord," I whispered, "what have we done?" Jesus' voice was firm, yet filled with compassion. "Ezra, the Amish way of life is not the problem. Simplicity, hard work, and community can be beautiful gifts. But when they replace the truth of my gospel, when they become the foundation instead of me, then they become a burden, not a blessing. Many in your community love me, but they do not know me. They follow rules, but they have not experienced my grace." I could hardly breathe. Jesus continued, "Tell them, Ezra, tell them that I did not come to bring more burdens, but to bring freedom. Tell them that I desire their hearts, not just their obedience. Tell them that salvation comes through faith in me alone, not through works, not through rules, not through traditions, but through my grace." The weight of his words pressed on my soul. I knew what he was asking me to do. I also knew what it would cost. If I told my community what I had seen, I would be shunned. I would lose everything, my farm, my standing, maybe even my family. Jesus knew my thoughts. "Some will listen, Ezra," he said. "Others will resist. But the truth must be spoken." And then, before I could say another word, everything faded into darkness. Suddenly, I gasped for air. My chest rose violently, and I felt the weight of my body once more. My eyes snapped open, and I was back in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Machines beeped around me. My wife, Rebecca, clutching my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Ezra," she cried, her voice thick with emotion. "You're alive. You were gone. They said you were gone for 14 minutes. 14 minutes. I had been dead for over 14 minutes. The doctors were amazed. They kept saying I shouldn't have survived, that I should have brain damage, that I should have been unresponsive. But I was fully aware, fully conscious, because Jesus had sent me back. Rebecca leaned over me, her voice barely a whisper. "Ezra, what did you see?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the mission Jesus had given me. "I saw him," I said softly. "I saw Jesus, and he told me something we need to hear." Rebecca's eyes widened. "I always felt like something was missing," she confessed. "Like we were doing everything right, and yet I never felt close to him." I squeezed her hand, my heart aching with love for this woman who had stood by my side for so many years. "It's not about what we do, Rebecca," I whispered. "It's about what he already did." When I returned home, I knew what I had to do. I stood before my community, before my fellow Amish brothers and sisters, and I told them everything. I told them about my death, about the darkness, about my encounter with Jesus. I told them what he had revealed about salvation, that it was not through works, but through faith in him alone. Some listened with tears in their eyes, their hearts hungry for the truth. They had felt the burden of trying to be perfect. And for the first time, they saw that Jesus had already done the work. Others resisted fiercely. The bishop warned me to stay silent. Some of the elders called me deceived. There were whispers that I had been led astray, that I was falling into dangerous thinking. But I did not stop, and slowly, the quiet transformation began. Young men and women started reading the Bible for themselves, discovering the grace they had never been taught. Families began teaching their children not just obedience, but relationship with Jesus. Some chose to leave the Amish way, not out of rebellion, but because they felt called to something more. The cost was heavy. Some friends turned away. Some doors were closed to me, but I was free. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. So, I share my story with you now. I spent my whole life trying to earn God's love, but Jesus showed me that his love was never something to be earned. It was always a gift, freely given. Salvation is not about rules. It is about a relationship. It is not through works. It is through grace. And so I ask you, are you striving to be good enough, or have you received the grace Jesus offers? Because I promise you this, nothing you do will ever be enough. But what he has done is more than enough. Choose him today, before it's too late.